Hello and welcome to Open Page. I'm Vivian Ruiz. What does a name like Steve has to do with Latin music? For my guest, it has been part of his music career. As an award-winning musician, songwriter, arranger, composer, and music producer, he has worked with top charting artists including Celia Cruz, Willie Chirino, Oscar de Leon, Tito Puente, and Ricardo Montaner, just to name a few. In 2003, he formed Palo, an original music band that fuses Afro-Cuban sounds with funk and jazz. And to top that, he's a full-time music business professor at Miami Dade College. My guest is the one and only Steve Roitstein. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Vivian. Thanks
so
for
happy to
having me.
have you here.
This is great. I love it.
I've danced a lot with your group.
I understand that. That's great. Well, te curaste. Yeah. You got healed.
Oh, yes, I did.
Yes.
Well, you were born in Connecticut. You came to Miami when you were 7 years old, and you're Jewish. Explain to me how, from that background, you came to have an Afro-Cuban band with the different rhythms.
Kind of a long story. I'll kind of squeeze it down a little bit. I didn't really become a musician until after my family had moved to South Florida. And I played the trumpet, and then I switched to the French horn. Curiously enough, living in South Florida, you hear Cuban music, you hear Latin music just in the ambiance. You can't really avoid it if you go out of your house. An interesting memory that I was recalling a couple weeks ago, when we moved down here, it was the 60s, and there weren't that many TV stations, and the local station used to play reruns of I Love Lucy. And that might have been the first time that I consciously heard Cuban music. Desi Arnaz did a cover version of Miguelito Valdés, Babalu Aye. And I was listening to that, watching it. I was around 8 years old and looking, oh, cool, this guy, he's wearing a white dinner jacket. He goes to the nightclub every night, Ricky Ricardo, and playing the drum. And I was just kind of fascinated and I loved the sound of that old school Cuban music. So I guess I've always kind of had that attraction to the drums and the Cuban sound, the old school sound in my soul. And when I ended up doing my master's degree, I switched from the French horn and changed to keyboards because I always knew I didn't really want to be a symphonic French horn player. Although I enjoyed it, I kind of had other things in mind. I wanted to do my own music, write songs, produce, and then I made the transition to the keyboards. I got lucky. I got to audition for a local Latin band, a very good band in the early 80s, a band called El Grupo Alma.
Of course.
And a very prominent band in the early 80s. And that became my school. I just felt like I got home on Cuban culture. I had already messed around with the congas and stuff, and some of my friends at the University of Miami would kind of help me learn a little bit of congas. I'm not a conguero, I'm not a conga player, but I know enough about it to appreciate it. And in Alma, they realized that I knew how to help out in the studio and do arrangements and stuff, so they brought me into the studio. Meanwhile, I was discovering El Gran Combo de Puerto Rico, Benny Moré, and a bunch of music that I had never really heard before, and it was like just a whole world had been opened up to me. Cachao, I had never heard Cachao before.
Yes.
So I was digging into all this stuff and researching it and learning it with my bandmates. I had incredible musicians, particularly the late, great Javier Oliva, one of the original Sobrinos de Juez.
I know.
And Javier kind of made friends with me, and we'd hang out, and he'd show me records and explain to me all about the singers and the songs and the styles, and I didn't know a lot of the basic rhythmic patterns, so I was learning it straight from a guy who knew. And then through word of mouth, I got to end up working a little bit with his brother Carlos Oliva, and eventually got hired by Willie Chirino to co-produce an album and became his musical director, and a lot of stuff took off from there.
Wow, that's wonderful. Tell me a little bit about your schooling. I know you went to school at the Interlochen Arts Academy.
In northern Michigan. And that was because when I was suddenly becoming good on the French horn as a high school student, at the time there were no magnet schools in Miami, and I was kind of obsessed with the French horn, and I found out about this place in northern Michigan, a school for the arts. My mom and my brother helped me apply. My older brother, David, is an incredible musician and my main mentor, and so he helped me make the audition tape. My mom negotiated with the school, single mother of 3, to get the scholarship high enough so that she could actually afford it. And I took off and spent 3 years in Michigan studying the French horn, and all of a sudden, instead of being like the band geek in public high school,
Right.
I became part of this incredible community of artists my same age and great faculty, and it was so nurturing and such a wonderful environment.
That is great. Who was the first artist that you actually worked with?
I would say the first notable artist that the world had some awareness of was probably Willie Chirino. That was in I guess around 1987, but I had worked my way up learning how to be a producer and arranger with a lot of different artists. And as a French horn player, earlier than that, I worked with a lot of big stars, but accompanying them in the orchestra as a freelancer is not the same as being a keyboard player helping somebody make their record.
When was it that you actually discovered your love and your passion for music?
I liked music a lot when I was a kid. Of course, when I came home from the hospital as a baby, I was in a house where my older brother was already practicing piano. Okay. And my mom and my grandparents were all very musical, so there was a lot of music in the home. But it wasn't until I was about, maybe I guess around 8 years old or so, that I saw a trumpet. My future uncle had this trumpet, and I just was attracted to it, and I wanted it.
And by that time, you were already in Miami.
Right.
So you grew up here, and you went to school here, and then you took off to different places to get your master's and your bachelor's. And
actually, the bachelor's and master's happened. I came home after high school, and that's the University of Miami.
Yeah.
So I'm a Cane, and I got my bachelor's degree in studio music and jazz as a French horn player, and then when I switched to keyboards, I got my master's degree in media writing and production at the same university. So I owe a lot to both of those great schools, Interlochen Arts Academy and University of Miami.
Wonderful. Okay, so we're going to take our first break, and when we come back, Steve will tell us of some of the Latin artists he has worked with and what was it like to work with them. Okay, so stay tuned to find out.
Miami Dade College has career paths in anything you want to be. What's your story? Be global. Be cutting edge. Be inventive. Be investigative. Be a hero. What do you want to be? Be the best. Be you. Be MDC.
Welcome back to Open Page with our guest, Miami Dade College music business professor, Steve Roitstein. Okay, we left off in the last segment about your schooling. Now, I want to find out how you learned Spanish.
Well, growing up in Miami, you pick up a few words, the bad words usually first. But I didn't have that many Cuban friends, although when I got to the university, I did. Although, of course, in the University of Miami, everybody spoke English. So I didn't need Spanish. When I got into a Latin band, some of the musicians preferred to communicate in Spanish, so I started to pick up a little more. And so I'm hanging out in this really Cuban-American ambience, and then, I start kind of like dating a Cuban girl, and her mom didn't speak any English. So I said, I need to know what my future mother-in-law is saying about me. And so I started to learn, and sitting there, maybe watching a telenovela or something like that, the Spanish soap opera, picking up some words here and there. And just as I put it, the Cubans say, blanca la duda. The hard face, just go for it, speak, say stuff, try and communicate, and make a lot of mistakes, but just don't worry about it. And usually people were very patient,
of course,
with me, and I learned little by little. I never really studied it formally.
Of course, they appreciate it. The same way goes for people who speak Spanish and are afraid to speak English, but
Hopefully.
no, it is.
Yeah.
It really does happen. So, before I go into this one, did you marry the girl?
Yes, I did.
All right.
And then we got divorced.
Okay, but you learned Spanish.
I learned Spanish. There were a lot of good outcomes from that marriage. It was
Good.
not a failure at all.
What attracted you to the Latin music?
I can't tell you that. It's a mystery. It's one of these questions like, why does somebody want to become a carpenter? Why does someone want to become a visual artist or a film director or a doctor? It's just a calling. And once I got the music bug, that was it. The Latin music just had a combination of merriment, joy. The rhythms always fascinated me. It had a lot of syncopated rhythms and these complicated structures that when you analyze them as a musician, they're very complicated, but when you listen to it as a listener, it is this whole organism that just kind of surrounds you. And I don't know, it's hard to describe. I can't really explain why, but that's some of it.
And of course you dance Cuban music.
No, I don't. I can appreciate great dancers because I've been playing salsa since the early 80s. So I've developed an eye for the really good dancers. I can tell I'm not a dancer.
Okay, so you had the opportunity to work with Celia Cruz and Willie Chirino, Oscar de Leon, Ricardo Montaner, whom I think you co-wrote a song for him, and it became a hit. Tell me a little bit about working with Celia Cruz.
Working with Celia was incredible. That was actually originally as a result of working with other musicians and producers like Willie Chirino and a great friend of mine, Oscar Gomez, who is a Cuban musician and producer who lives in Madrid. And both of those gentlemen had the opportunity to produce records with Celia. So initially, I was working in combination with either Willie Chirino as a producer or Oscar Gomez as a producer, and kind of preparing the music for her. During the first couple songs that I worked on with her, I never got the opportunity to meet Celia. I was preparing, the recordings and the music and the directing the musicians and kind of preparing the accompaniment, and then the producer would work with her, recording her vocals in some other studio, and I didn't, unfortunately, have an opportunity. Around the third or fourth song that I worked on for her, I got to meet her in the studio, and I was introduced to her, and she told me in Spanish, "Oh yeah, you're the American guy that does all these really danceable arrangements. Congratulations." Of course, it was in Spanish, but she was such a wonderful person.
I know,
and
she
so
was
down
amazing.
to earth.
What an amazing woman.
And we still, my team now with my group Palo, we still talk about her a lot and use her as kind of a model for what an artist can be, as a person and just as an artist.
Even at the end, when she was still singing, and they had that wonderful homage for her on TV where everybody went, and she knew what her outcome was, pretty soon, and she was still there with her smile and inspiring everybody. She was an amazing, Celia Cruz was an amazing woman.
Yep, yeah, she's one of a kind. I remember when I was around that time when I was working with her, when the record companies, the major record companies, they're big businesses and they need to make a profit. And they were always asking me, "We're looking for the next Celia Cruz." And I'm sorry, there's no other one. I can maybe help you find another singer, but it won't be Celia Cruz. It'll be somebody else.
She's unique. So Willie Chirino and Cheyenne, and Ricardo Montaner. That's who you did the co-wrote the song with. Tell me a little bit about that.
That was also an offshoot of working with Willie. Then Oscar Gomez, who is the other producer that I mentioned, was producing Ricardo Montaner very early in his career. He hadn't really become a superstar yet. He later became one. And I was doing some arrangements for Ricardo Montaner because he liked Cuban music. And so I did a few songs on an album, and they all were successful. And so then Oscar, on the next record, he said, we're kind of short a couple songs. Do you have anything laying around? So I gave him a couple songs. They chose one of them. I didn't write the lyrics. Ricardo is the lyricist. He's really almost like in some occasions like really a poet. His lyrics.
I know, he's wonderful.
And in that particular song, the song's called Castillo Azul.
Castillo Azul.
And that song, he kind of broke what I saw as like some of the songwriting rules.
The mold. He broke the mold.
He broke the mold, but it was a beautiful lyric. And so I walked into the record company at the time, an independent Venezuelan record label. And the president said to me, your song's going to be the first single. I said, that's great. I barely even realized the significance of that. And then next time I went there, they said, did you see the song's number one? So it's kind of like I tell my students here at Miami Dade College,
sure.
I tell them it's kind of like they bring you up from the minor leagues to the big leagues. You're at bat and you hit a home run.
That's right.
And
you just got to be prepared.
That helps.
So when you are a professor here at Miami Dade College.
That's correct.
So how long have you been a professor here?
About 15 years.
Wow, that's great. And how do you feel teaching everything that you have known all these years, everything that you have learned?
I can't explain how much it means to me.
I know.
The past 15 years, my life has changed incredibly. Because that was when I formed my own band, Palo, and became a professor at Miami Dade College at the same time. And I call it kind of like a co-mission.
Yes.
Because I'm able to draw from everything that I did previous to coming here at Miami Dade College and previous to forming Palo, all that history of doing everything that I did. And then what I've been doing since then, the music industry has changed incredibly, and I've been kind of trying to keep up with it and finding my own way with this new landscape that we're presented with. The industry has changed, technology has changed, and the students and I work together. We teach each other.
That is wonderful, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is so. It is overwhelming when you're actually having to teach these people and you see the results. And I don't know. I mean, I'm also a teacher here, and to see my students come out and I see them on TV and I see them here and I see them in theatrical productions, and it is so heartwarming. It is wonderful.
Yep.
Okay, so just hold it right there, and we're going to take another break. But when we come back, Steve will tell us the meaning behind Palo. We'll be right back.
Miami Dade College has career paths in anything you want to be. What's your story? Be global. Be cutting edge. Be inventive. Be investigative. Be a hero. What do you want to be? Be the best. Be you. Be MDC.
We're back with Miami Dade College music business professor Steve Roitstein. So now, I want to know, how did Palo come about? Where did you get that name?
Well, the name for the group, when I decided to start the group, I didn't have a name for it. I was hoping to have something short, and I knew that the music was going to be mostly in Spanish, but I knew that maybe we could have some fans that were not Spanish speakers, so I didn't want to get some really hard to pronounce name, and I started thinking about it, and then I said, of course, let me use my nickname, which is Palo.
Really?
Yes.
But how did that come about, Palo?
Well, one time when I was a kind of a freelance keyboard player, before I had thought about starting my group, I was playing with a great gentleman, may he rest in peace, Luis Santi,
Yes,
great Cuban band leader and pianist. And I was on my way into the club that we were playing in Little Havana. And as is typical, there were a couple people hanging out outside the door, and a Cuban gentleman was standing there. And I'm on my way in with my keyboard, so he's asking me in Spanish, "Usted toca con el grupo, no? You play with the group?" And I go, "Yes." And he said, "What's your name?" And I said, "Steve." And it looked like it didn't register. And I said, "It's like Esteban, but in English." And he goes, "Ah, Estic." So he was like correcting me how to say my name. And ever since then, my friends have called me either Estic or Palo.
So that's How you came up with Palo?
Yeah,
Oh
I
my
liked it
God,
because it was
that's great.
short and really, even if you call it Palo, it's close enough.
That is great. That's wonderful. So, what about the Afro-Cuban funk and jazz mixture? How did you come up with that?
It wasn't really any kind of marketing mix that I was looking for. When I made the decision to start a band, it wasn't a decision, an immediate decision. It was originally like a thought. It was a reaction to the fact that my passion for music that had always been so high and such a center of my thinking had started to wane a little bit, because working in big business for major multinational corporations, it becomes all about what's your next success. And it started to seem like some of my projects were almost like work. And I realized that I was losing the fire for it. Mm-hmm. So even though I had always avoided becoming an artist, I thought maybe I'll form a band. And then little by little, I got these ideas that helped me finally decide I'm going to form a band. So then I thought, well, what is it going to be? Let me just combine my favorite kinds of music, which are Cuban music, funk, and jazz, and just mash them all together. And then I kind of figured out how I was going to accomplish that. It was a process of a few years before I actually started the band. And
because you started it in 2003.
that was our first gig in the summer of 2003. But the preparations and the study and the research for it were several years before I really thought about how I was going to do it. I knew I love songs. I like jamming too, but I didn't want to have just a jam band where we were just kind of messing around and improvising. So since I knew I wanted songs, I didn't want to be the lead singer. And I tried out maybe a couple of different ideas, but when I finally found Leslie Cartaya, I said, this is it. And we started writing songs together, and we wrote really well together. And we started building the ingredients around that. We found our percussion players, one of whom is still with us, Raimer Olalde. The other percussionist, Filbert Armenteros, has recently left the band. And the original sax player was Dr. Ed Calle, who was also a professor here at Miami Dade College. He resigned last year. So now our personnel is, the original three are myself, Steve Roitstein, Leslie Cartaya, the lead vocalist, Raimer Olalde, who plays timbales, and the newer guys are Dairon Gallardo on congas and the incredible Aldo Salvent on the saxophone.
I haven't heard them. I need to listen to them.
And so they're with us live whenever we perform. Now we're just starting to work the new songs around the new personnel and kind of bring their personality into the mix. And
Palo was nominated for a Grammy in 2015?
Grammy and a Latin Grammy.
And a Latin Grammy.
Actually, we got nominated for the Latin Grammy first. And so we got to do the whole thing and going to Las Vegas and doing a promotional tour and in Los Angeles and all over.
Because you just don't perform here. You perform all over, right?
Now, yeah, we do a decent amount of touring all over the world. We've been to Europe, Latin America, around the United States, different countries.
You know what? I forgot to ask you something. How important is it for you to be working and your students actually seeing the result in you? How do they feel about that?
I think some of them are inspired by it because it only took me about a semester to realize when I first started teaching here that most of the students are not already superstars. If they were, they wouldn't need to be going to college.
Right.
They'd be off on tour and doing their career themselves. Most of them are towards the beginning of their career. So a lot of what we focus on is how do you get from where you are now to where you want to be. And they, I think, get pretty inspired because the Palo story during these past 15 years, the first gig we ever played in Hoy Como Ayer, thanks to Fabio, who gave us a shot. The first gig we played on a Thursday night, we had 30 people in attendance. It wasn't exactly a spectacular start, but what made me happy was they had fun. So I figured, well, if 30 people can have fun, then more people could have fun.
Sure.
If it was a total bomb and nobody enjoyed the music, I might have started reconsidering, but they did. So the students have seen, they're not with me for 15 years, but I tell them and we explain, kind of like the way that the ramp went up.
Now, you also started branching out to TV and film because you did a score for a few of the documentaries that Joe Cardona did.
Yes, Joe Cardona is a great documentary film director, and he's been doing it for probably about 25 years.
I did a movie with him.
Oh, great. So then you know who
Yes,
I'm talking about.
Water, Mud, and Factories. I actually did. It was one of his first year.
Yeah, so Joe is a huge music fan and music historian, and he kind of looked me up and we made friends, and at some point I had already been doing, with limited resources at the beginning, music videos for Palo as we were able to do them. And I met a really talented young filmmaker named Ralph Gonzalez. And so Ralph was helping out on a lot of the stuff that we were doing. Eventually, Ralph and Joe met, and then Joe had this idea to do a documentary on the original music scene in Miami, and that film became Miami Boheme. So Palo was a big part of that, and I was just around watching Ralph and Joe direct this film, and I sucked it all in like a sponge and learned. And as it happened, that film won an Emmy Award.
That's right. Steve, my perfect thing, what I would love to do is to be able to sit here with you and talk about everything that has happened in your life. And
Me too.
I think it's so inspiring because it's inspiring to your students and to young people that are actually watching us right now and can be inspired by your story. So unfortunately, we have to go.
All right.
But I promise you, I'll be there dancing with your band.
Well,
You're great.
If anyone wants to know where we're playing, just go to gopalo.com.
There you go.
And you will be able to find out all the clubs and events that we do.
I wish you a lot of success.
Thank you very much.
And it's quite an honor for me to have been able to talk to you today.
Thanks, Vivian.
This is all the time we have today, and we want to thank our guest for this amazing interview and to you at home for watching. So until next time, I'm Vivian Ruiz, and have a wonderful day.